Welcome back to the Foodscaper Podcast, y'all. The show where we explore business, design, and philosophy behind edible landscaping. Today, we're diving into another conversation with someone who's been steadily shaping what it means to run a professional foodscaping company. My guest today is Nate Fournier, the owner of Reimagined Roots, a business that blends contracting know-how, permaculture design, and a people-first philosophy. In this episode, we'll talk about the lessons he's carried from engineering into foodscaping, why he is invested in a shop and marketing, and how he values things like radical candor showing up in the way that he is building culture. We're also going to explore things like design tools, hardscaping, and even AI, and how technology is shaping the future of our field without losing sight of ecology. Nate, it is a pleasure to have you with us. Let's get started by hearing a little bit about yourself, what Reimagined Roots is, and the beautiful services that you all are offering to the world.
Awesome. Thank you so much. I'm very excited to be here. Yeah, Reimagined Roots is my dream come true. It's something that I've been thinking about since I first stumbled across the word permaculture in 2014, and it planted a seed in my heart. And I had just graduated from college, and I was still paying off a ton of student loan debt. And I was like, this is what I'm going to do. Someday, somehow, I don't know what path is going to create that process for me, but someday I'm going to do it. And I'm so grateful. So it's been 5 years. I started in right at the beginning of COVID, really, 2021. And yeah, we are an edible and ecological landscape design and construction company, transforming boring grasslands into beautiful, abundant ecosystems packed with food, medicine, and native plants.
Yes, I love that you've got your elevator spiel at the ready there, and it's provocative, right? This is like these boring grass lawns, and then gets people like thinking, okay, I can do more immediately there. We're going to dive into, of course, all things in your story and hear more about your services. But to get us started, I want to touch on something that really struck me in going through your website, which is the fact that both you and Lucy, one of the partners and coworkers on the team, had in your bios that the words human ecosystems and human habitats. And I want to kind of lead off with like why that is so important and where those words came from and how they ended up in both of your bios. It shares, seems like there's a shared vision here and something, if we peel the onion back a little bit, that will reveal how you all interpret that.
Yeah, coming up with the right verbiage to describe what we do is a challenge. It's been something that from day one we've had a hard time with conveying, okay, what is it do we actually do, right? Foodscaping. I like to think that people, it makes them question, like, wait a minute, what does that mean, right? Foodscaping, like, oh, it's kind of in the word itself. It describes what we do. And I've brainstormed this a lot. And so I love the idea of a whole human habitat where it's a holistic view on providing all of the basic needs for ourselves, for our clients, as well as all other living things in that ecosystem. And I have again gone back and forth with different ways of saying it, right? Whole human habitat, human ecosystems, just really to convey the difference between you have a house and your yard, and it's your dominion and nothing else is allowed. You have control and you have conquered all other life, and that is like this stereotype or this perspective that we've been sold, unfortunately, for so long upon the dawn of the American dream of the white picket fence and the perfectly manicured grass lawn, which really was sold to us by, Scott's Lawn Care and like these chemical corporations that very effectively transformed this entire ecology of this human development, human settlements, with really the dawn of the suburbia as a whole.
Yeah, it really resonates, and I think it's just speaks to this thread that I've been trying to weave through the podcast time and time again that really was embedded through Robin Wall Kimmerer and braiding sweetgrass, which is this idea that we are, not separate. We are a part of this ecosystem. We are here because, not because, but we are here to, in part, provide for our needs. We have to be a part of these ecosystems. We have to design in our own needs. And we're not conservationists. We're creating something that serves both us humans and the ecology, with the recognition that we depend on all of it to create any kind of harmonious life on planet Earth.
Yeah, it's so important. In right, the book The Serviceberry and of course Braiding Sweetgrass, Robin Valkim, she does such a good job of describing this circular economy of being able to have from a permaculture ethics perspective or principle of that return of surplus or just through intentional design creating abundance for all. And it's so doable. And it's so great to be able to prove that every day. Like, yes, this is doable. And yeah, I think a paradigm shift is upon us.
Yeah. Did you have any moments in your life that really just exemplified like that abundance, or like we can do it? Because I feel like if you haven't experienced it, then you don't realize like what abundance feels like in your body. You can just like see abundance at the grocery store, but to realize like nature's abundance, did you have any moments like that?
Yeah, absolutely. So I am very grateful for the opportunity I had to live and work in New Zealand on a regenerative agriculture and permaculture farm out there called the Kawanga Institute. And there they had a 25 to 30-year-old mature food forest. And that was the first time after reading so many books and taking the online PDCs and just, all the theory, being able to like see a mature permaculture system in practice and walking through that forest, which just looked like a trail through the woods to the layman's eye, walking through with an elder indigenous New Zealand person who planted it 20, 25 years ago and who has managed it for that long, hearing him describe the relationship that he has with every tree and every plant and how everything serves a purpose and not just one purpose, ideally three or more purposes. So not only is it food, but it's also a host species for this specific endangered insect. And it's providing, of course, the carbon sequestration, water infiltration, all these beautiful things. And to see that in person. And it just looks like the woods, right? There's something that we take for granted every day, just looking at a typical forest, but with intentional design, being able to stack those functions so that there's just overflowing with abundance from apples, pears, peaches, plums. And of course, in New Zealand, they have a very unique climate where they're able to have some citruses and different things that just, again, you're surrounded by that abundance and then sharing it. Part of the abundance factor is the community element of it and being able to have so much that you can give it to your neighbor. And then what that does for a culture to sit down with a stranger and have a meal with them is like such an important element of abundance that is all stems from food. So yeah, really beautiful opportunity.
Yeah, that's such a beautiful thing, and it's kind of my greatest hope, and I imagine you share this, that like our clients, that is what they are bringing people to that table and creating those moments and being that door for other people, maybe their neighbors or friends or family. You mentioned permaculture studies and stuff, and one of the unique things I came across was that you've taken three permaculture design courses. Um, why three courses? What is where's your love of the course come from, and how does it kind of affect you now as a edible landscape edible landscaper, somebody who runs a business now?
Yeah. One thing that I did take away from university and just is my love of learning. Like I love to learn, I love to study, and I'm just live life with so much curiosity. And it's very humbling to just realize like, oh, I don't know anything about this. Let me dive in. And so, and I'm willing to pay for education. I think that's such an important thing that in the age of endless information, of course, you can Google and YouTube and read all the books you can, but being able to have like a more structured process to learning is really important. And so I was first introduced to permaculture again 2014. I heard Jeff Lawton on a podcast that was actually all about survivalism, the survival podcast. Jack Spirko, he's a pretty influential mentor in my life. I would say he's got a great philosophy of like, there's balance of ecological beauty and abundance and like survivalism and preparedness, which I think a lot of our clients find ourselves on this spectrum somewhere, a
Mhm.
balance there. But being able to describe it as like this really beautiful way of designing abundance into our systems by using nature as our guide and recognizing Mother Nature as the ultimate engineer. And so that I was basically hooked, in that moment. And that's when I took, so, and he was advertising at that moment too, his online PDC. It was the first online PDC that Jeff Lawton was hosting. And so I signed right up and dove in, and it was a lot. It was a little
Yeah.
overwhelming at first, and I, committed my nights and weekends, and I went all in on it. And so, yeah, I learned so much from that. But even still, I mean, permaculture is such a complex philosophy, and the balance of the philosophy, the theory, and the practical side of it takes time to really embody. And so, after I took the first one, it was, I think, 2 years later, he released a revised and updated version of his online PDC, and that was with an alumni discount. And so that was a no-brainer. I was like, I'm doing it again, and be able to see all the things that he updated, which again, brilliant, brilliant educator, like really the best in the space. So yeah, so that was the two online ones. And then when I had the opportunity to go to New Zealand, that was like, okay, I need to actually get my hands in the dirt and see this in person, which I had wanted to do all along, but never could justify leaving my job or quitting, after with all my student loans and all of these things that I had already committed to. It was a tough decision to say I'm going to quit it all and start a gardening company right away. But I had built, I played the long game and set a goal for quite a few years after.
One of the things we hear from pro foodscapers all the time is this need for more community, connection, and education. And that's why we've created the Foodscaper membership. This is our online forum and learning space just for pro foodscapers. You can share your work, get feedback from me and other professionals, and watch dozens of classes in our training library. It's just $29. First month is free. We would love to see you there. You mentioned that nature is the ultimate engineer, and yet you studied engineering in school, read about that, and tell us about your background a little bit and how you came into this from your engineering studies.
Yeah, I had a pretty clear cut path. Even I went to a vocational high school for drafting and design. And so there I fell in love with CAD modeling, so computer aided design, and being able to create 3D models of, at the time, it was mostly mechanical parts, machine, like, and so at my vocational school, I was in the drafting department, and then right next door was the machine shop. And so we had all kinds of projects where I would design a part and then have the 3D model and a blueprint, bring it over to the machine shop and like see it get made and work with the machinists to like understand the manufacturing process, and that concept of just like building something and designing something and then seeing it come to life and using the computer as a tool to do that really intrigued me. And then usually there's a stigma with vocational schools that you don't typically go to college afterwards. You just go right into the trades. But I didn't really plan on going to college, but I did apply to WPI, is Worcester Polytechnic Institute, right in Worcester. It's where I was kind of born and raised, and it's a pretty high profile school. And so I applied and got in. And so if I didn't get in, I already had a job working at a machine shop where I could have stayed. But I decided to go, and I studied mechanical engineering with a focus in astronautic engineering. And I got down this path of wanting to mine asteroids and help design and build the equipment that would mine asteroids to help save our planet. So we don't have to mine all the lithium off our planet. We can find an asteroid, and it's all so much abundance of resources in space. And then I realized pretty quickly too, after graduating, I was like, there's a lot we can fix at home before we spend so much money and effort going elsewhere. And so, yeah, that was an interesting thing. But once I was working in the industry, I was working as a repair design engineer for F-35 fighter jets. I thought it was my dream job. It was a really cool, opportunity. But the reality of it was I was sitting at a desk all day 10 hours a day, 40 hours a week, plus under fluorescent lights in a cubicle with just like red tape and corporate structure and just like having to wear a button-down shirt. And it just wasn't my vibe. And I learned that pretty quickly. And so that's, part of my journey of finding permaculture was just looking elsewhere for something, trying to find what my why was, trying to find what I really wanted to do with life, which I think most people can relate to when you first graduate college. Um, and so once I found permaculture, I said, okay, this is what I'm going to do. I need to quit my job, but I want to do this gracefully. How do I do it? And so I was looking for other careers in mechanical engineering that better aligned. And I hopped around a little bit, didn't find anything quite right, but I did also learn about like real estate investing and went down a rabbit hole about the fastest path to true wealth was through real estate. And you know, wanting to start a permaculture design company, but not knowing how successful it would be, like would the numbers make sense? It's a bit of a jump. And so I was like, if I just get a couple of rental properties around my town in Worcester, there's a lot of three-family, multifamily properties. And I was like, if I just buy two or three-family properties, the rental income from those will cover a lot of my personal expenses if I live in one unit. I'll learn a lot of practical skills by renovating those, and the cash flow will at least cover my basic expenses so that I'm not stressing about money, cover my student loans, whatever. And then I can pursue my true passion, which is permaculture design, and not stress so much about the money. And so that was a very long-term plan. And I mean, it worked. It's exactly what I did. I started flipping houses with no experience at all while working full-time, leaving the job and going straight to the house that I was flipping get there at 7 p.m. and work till 10 p.m. or midnight, nights and weekends, just all in constantly, learning skills and watching YouTube and having no experience, but just like figuring it out as I went. And yeah, I mean, so then that worked, and then COVID was the real trigger where it was like, okay, this is the time. People, we need it now more than ever. Just, I think society's ready for it. I'm ready for it. Let's go, and so made it happen.
Heck yeah, man. What a story. I love it. And such dedication and such long-term planning. I think so many people are really stuck in this idea that they have to go directly from one to the other. But I think what you're offering is this idea that like a bridge plan can be the real key to figuring out how to get from A to B, is designing in that step that will make it feasible. And in your case, it was a really amazing one because you built all these skills that sounds like, you're able to translate into your business. So then Reimagined Roots comes online with the pandemic, and then what do you all do? Like how do you describe, the work that you provide in a more longer form?
Yeah, so trying to combine, and we'll talk a little bit about hardscaping. I just recently started doing more of that in-house. Previously, I was subcontracting it, but selling this vision of, what is your backyard currently? And for most people, it's just grass. And being able to say, what if there was a bluestone patio with a beautiful cedar pergola, and maybe underneath that bluestone patio was a rainwater catchment system that recirculated the water, and then there was a bubbling urn that attracted beneficial pollinators and birds and more wildlife while drowning out the sound of the cars driving by. And then around that patio are raised garden beds where you can plant your veggies and herbs. And then however far you want to take it, you can continue to expand. And I typically tell clients, dream big. What is your long-term vision? If time and money were no object, and then let's create a long-term relationship and phase these things in over time. And we can help with the project management of making sure the order of operations makes sense based on their time and budget. But as far as our offerings, raised garden beds, of course, are our bread and butter. Planting backyard orchards and fruit trees, and the carpentry with raised beds comes more carpentry such as arbors, pergolas, trellises, things like that. And then I've done a couple of small jobs with like high-end saunas, or someday maybe some tiny houses. But as of now, tying in the stonework as well. And so now being able to do the patios, retaining walls, walkways, which is a good foot in the door for clients with higher budgets to then upsell the ecological elements. And so I've gone back and forth with that, but But yeah, I think that's a pretty broad overview. And then of course,
And
fine
then,
gardening and native plants.
yeah, I was going to jump in and say, I've noticed you all talking a lot about native plants and pollinator gardens and things like that as well. So that seems like a core service and offering as well, right?
Yeah, I actually think now we get more requests for people who are looking for more ecological and pollinator friendly habitat gardens, more so than edible landscapes, which has been an interesting shift. We have a really strong presence in Worcester with a lot of native plant groups, native plant initiatives. The city itself has a Department of Sustainability and Resilience, and they've put out white papers and bulletins really encouraging people to plant more rain gardens and native plants and wildflower meadows and things. So it's really exciting.
Yeah. Yeah, that is really exciting. We've noticed a similar pattern happen, almost a little bit unplanned, because we're doing this because we really care about the earth and people want to have that connection. And usually when we get a vision statement from a client, it says something like, I want my kids to be able to go outside and pick berries and carrots straight from the yard. And I want them to see pollinators and understand that we're having a beneficial impact on the water cycle. And then you're like, okay, well, some of those things are not food plants, but we see this theme coming up time and time again because it's trending in the best way possible right now. And so it's a really exciting space for foodscapers to diversify in that way, as well as continue to just feed our dreams of making the earth a greener, more vibrant place. Um, so you get Reimagined Roots up and going. You're doing all the different things that we just talked about. Um, we've got so many different things to talk about that I want to fast forward ahead a little bit and skip over some of the building of the business stuff that we might otherwise talk about. So you end up starting the business and having a few people on staff, and things are growing a little bit. I know you invested in a truck and all that stuff. But then you get to the point where I noticed you guys had a shop, like an indoor shop where you're building and you're kind of touring around the shop. You're doing some of your contracting work and they're talking about upgrades. And I'm like, all right, wow, this is always a big leap for a company. And so I think there's a lot of interesting things about having a proper shop. And I want to kind of start our the next chapter of our conversation by talking about that, where we talk about just the business a little bit. So walk us through that decision. How did you decide, okay, I want a shop? How did you decide I can pay for it? And how's it working out for you? What are the different ways that it benefits the business?
Yeah. Yeah, definitely a big leap. And it was only my third year in business. So my second year in business, I was leasing some nursery space. And so that was something I had started to do pretty early on, was just wholesale in some fruit trees, especially like some lesser known cultivars and things that I wanted to have on hand that most clients couldn't just get at a local nursery. And so I just kind of shopped around for different spaces. I saw some land, and it was just a bit of a serendipitous connection where I found somebody who had a little bit of land next to this big warehouse. And at the time, the warehouse it was actually a shrimp farm for a while. So the whole building had been converted to an indoor shrimp farm. It's pretty cool. They invested so much money. I mean, they like put radiant floor heating into 7,000 square foot building. They put radiant floor heating, poured a concrete floor. It was just like a dirt open air kind of pole barn. It did a bunch of work to it. But then they went out of business, unfortunately. And then a exercise gym, a gym came in, and they were operating out of it while I had my nursery on the hillside. So I just had a little flat space, a pretty small area where I was operating out of for a while. And I had my truck and stuff was my personal truck and a tiny little utility trailer in my personal garage at my house, and then had the plants up here. But I've been eyeing the building. I'm like, oh, maybe someday I could be at the scale where it would make sense to have that. But I wasn't ready. I wasn't ready at all. And then the next year, it came for sale. The owner approached me and said, "Hey, this gym, they actually had to get kicked out because the zoning wasn't appropriate. So it's like agricultural zoning, and the gym didn't qualify. So after they were here for over a year, they ended up getting flagged by the city and they had to leave. And then the place was empty and he didn't want to deal with it. And he's like, "Hey, I'm thinking about selling this place. Do you want it?" And I was like, oof, not at all ready. Like I could not afford it. And it doesn't make sense. But I am grateful for some of my experience with real estate where I was able to provide some creative financing options and come up with some different solutions. And so I worked with him to set up a rent to own agreement. And so I locked in the purchase price and started paying rent, but that rent would eventually go towards my down payment. And so I structured it in such a way that over the course of, I think it was 2 years of renting, then I would have the option to buy. And so while I was renting it, it was 4,000, it was 4,500 a month, 4,500, which I really couldn't afford. And the whole space was empty. I mean, a massive building, and it was totally empty. And I was like, had a tiny little stack of tools in the corner. But otherwise, my whole vision was really as a real estate investment. I was like, okay, if I was like separate from my landscaping business, if I had the opportunity to buy this, how much could I rent it for? What kinds of tenants would be suitable? How much would that generate? How much would that offset the mortgage payment or the rent? And so I worked into the agreement originally that I could sublease it. And so after like a year and a half of doing that, I was paying full out. It was the biggest expense of my business. Like I sacrificed a lot of profit, mostly all the profit those first couple of years because I had the space, but I knew I would eventually grow into it and it would eventually make sense once I found tenants too. And so I didn't have any tenants for like the first year. It was way harder than I thought because they had to be farm related. And I was like, oh, I'll just find like a microgreens company to come in and operate. But I couldn't for a while. After a year and a half, 2 years, I finally did. I found a microgreens company. They came in and a gourmet mushroom company. And so he came in and set up his farm. So now there's two active farms and they're paying rent and operating out of a small, 750 square feet about each while having a really cool vibe, like a really cool, I branded the building as the Eco Hub. And so now they offset some of the rent, some of the cost. And then just a month ago, 2 months ago, I finally actually closed on the building and bought it. And now my mortgage payment is less than what I was paying in rent. And I immediately got a ton of equity. And so it was just kind of by chance, by luck, by strategy, all of these things came together to make for a really good deal. But it was a risk. It was a big risk at the time.
Yeah, wow. Good for you for taking that risk and going for it. Now it's paying off. The Eco Hub. I think that is such a brilliant convergence of businesses. And there's so much to be learned there in terms of networking with our other like-minded entrepreneurs in the towns that we're in and just feeling like we could share resources, but even more, we can just share the energy of trying to transform our communities into something better and greener. And I can imagine there's like chance interactions that just feed your soul to be around those businesses. I don't know if you want to say more about that.
Yeah, definitely, definitely. And it is so cool because we're trying to create this circular economy too, where the spent mushroom blocks from the farm we use in our compost
Yeah.
and the spent microgreens trays all go in a compost pile. And then I have chickens on site too. And the chickens are always in there tearing it up. And then we add that to our raised beds for clients. And yeah, it's really cool there. And then just bigger picture wise, I mean, for us to have like I think culturally, just like the professionalism, like having a nice branded space where the crew shows up with plenty of parking, and it's just like, we have all of our tools really well organized, having the office space, it was a big elevation in just kind of status and energy of like, oh, this is like serious. This isn't just what it was before, which was just some kind of scatterbrained guy talking crazy, talking a lot of nonsense about changing the world out of his garage, his broken fallen his garage that was kind of falling down. And so just that leap really did change a lot.
Yeah, I can imagine that really changes the way that even your team members view the business and just the future outlook of it, the projection of, hey, we're growing into something really professional and organized here. And that just feels so different than the way I have done things, and it seems really attractive, especially for people on your team. So, um, ground us in where you are in the world. I'm not sure we talked much about, this location and the where this building is and um, where you are in the world.
Yeah, yeah, that's probably helpful. I am in central Massachusetts. So in the Northeast, born and raised here, but Worcester is the second largest city outside of Boston. and it's about an hour from Boston, and it's really centrally located. It's about an hour from Boston, from Springfield, Massachusetts, from Hartford, Connecticut, from Providence, Rhode Island. So it's a pretty central location throughout New England, which gives us some pretty cool opportunities for market divergence and such.
I'm always impressed and fascinated by how many like smaller cities have, successful foodscaping companies. And Worcester obviously sounds like it's not that small, being the second biggest city in Massachusetts, but just fascinating and very interesting also like in the Northeast to note how kind of no matter where you are, you're always close to things and you're always close to other cities, and the sprawl kind of merges into each other, even if it doesn't feel necessarily sprawly. There's always people out there who seem to be interested in this type of service. Um,
Yeah. And I'm glad, like, even politically and just demographically, the Northeast and in Massachusetts specifically is well positioned for this kind of work, right? There's a lot of earthy, crunchy kind of people here. And I think the local governments and the state governments, like we're quite progressive on eco-friendly initiatives, which is definitely helpful. But there's also the sticks, there's a good diversity as well, which provides for interesting and yeah, I think a well-rounded clientele.
Taking a quick break to remind you about our monthly Pro Talks. These are free, live, continuing education classes taught by some of the most inspiring ecological, edible landscapers in the business. These Pro Talks give you foodscaper education that you truly can't find anywhere else. So join us each month. If you're a member, you'll also get the recording. Enroll in the next Pro Talk at foodscaper.com/Pro Talks. One of the other interesting things I noticed about your business I wanted to ask you about was this radical candor that you listed in one of your three values. I thought that was really cool that you had on your website, like, these are our values. And even just to take the time and do the exercise when you're setting up your business, like, what are our values? What are we going to communicate to people? What do we want them to take from their visit to our website about what we stand for? And so what is where did that come from as one of your three values, and kind of how does that play out with your clients? I'm curious.
Yeah, it is really important to us, and it's something that we do really embody and integrate into our culture because it's so important. It's just having the hard conversations, like getting them out of the way. There's so much research and just so much, I mean, anecdotal feeling of like nobody likes lingering tension or lingering resentment or anything like that. And I think that setting up a culture of like, hey, you can come to us anytime. Like, never be afraid of bringing something up if you're upset, if you're not happy. And this goes to for our employees and for our clients. And so from day one, meeting our clients and saying, hey, we want to make sure that you're getting what you expected. And so much of radical candor is setting and meeting expectations with people. So being very clear about that and say, our goal is to make sure your expectations are always met. I want to make sure if anything starts to veer off course, that you have all the power in the world to come to us and say, hey, actually, let's, can we chat about this? I'm never going to have that like pressure or tension that could be created otherwise. And the same with employees. Really important just to be able to allow them space to bring things up that they care about. And I think it's really important.
How do you think you create that space, both kind of formally and informally?
Yeah, we
Or what
have
would be your advice to people who are struggling with that?
mm, yeah, having more structured meetings. Like, we'll have one-on-one meetings, which are relatively casual versus like performance review. And this is on the employee side, of course, where we open up the door for those conversations, and really just try to be laid back about it, no pressure, and just say, hey, how are things going? How are you feeling? What's something, if we could improve one thing, what would it be? From a leadership perspective, from a technical installation perspective, like, is there anything at all that we can do better for you? Usually makes people way more comfortable and able to provide feedback. And then for clients too, like throughout I mean, right off the bat, having those conversations is important, depending on the scale of the project. I mean, if it's a really big project, making sure we check in and sit down with them again and just say, hey, just, we're halfway through. Here's the design. Here's what we agreed upon. Here's where we're at. Where's the progress is. How's everything looking? Where are we at? You feeling good? We're on track. Just checking in, which can be a little, you have to be strategic with it because there are opportunities to open up doors that maybe you don't necessarily want to open, or planting seeds of things like, oh, actually, now that you mention it, I would love to change this whole thing. And so there's a balancing act with it. But yeah, just giving people those, and looking them in the eye, and sitting down with somebody, having eye contact and be like, how are you, genuinely opening space and giving space for that.
Yeah. Do you do that on a more ad hoc basis with the people on your team, or do you schedule that stuff in way ahead of time?
Yeah, we'll do one-to-one, more formal one-to-ones every month. I say less formal one-on-ones every month, but it is structured and it is on the calendar, and it is like, hey, stay for 30 minutes after the day is over. If you guys come back a little bit early, and sometimes we'll say this week, we'd like to meet with you. If a day ends a little bit early, we can sit down then. But otherwise, the performance reviews are once a quarter, and those are a bit more prepared. And like we give them a survey to fill out, and just, which gives them more space too. So it's not on the spot. We're not asking these pretty hard questions on the fly, which some people can get nervous about. So giving them a form where they can like express and take their time to think through their answers, and then coming to us with that at the meeting, and then we can talk about it more constructively.
Yeah. One thing we do is we've got like a Slack channel that is like technical difficulties. And that just helps people kind of say, like, it's more open to anybody. So it's not necessarily a direct thing, but it's just one thing that's worked. Like, this is not working, and then it kind of puts it out there. And then by putting it out there to everybody, it also creates another level of accountability because it's like now it can't be ignored. I can't necessarily like brush it under the table because this is a problem for the team, that, might be like, can we please get a better system for, organizing receipts or like just like, the little things that can like irk people that there's a hard place to bring that up if you don't. Those can be like the things that get under people's skin, but we don't necessarily have a great place to talk about them. So
Mm,
that's one little thing
yeah.
that's worked for us.
Right. And technical things are sometimes easier than I mean, always really easier than
Right.
interpersonal issues, because that's, the number one reason people leave their job just overall is because of either their manager or their coworkers. It's just like a cultural thing. And if people don't get along for any reason, that's a problem. And so it's a hard one to overcome. But again, sitting everybody down and just having the conversation, air it all out, and then make a decision.
Yeah. So with your team, I've noticed you've done hiring. Where size are you at right now?
Yeah, right now we have seven, actually six crew, um, and then Lucy and I in the office. We have an executive assistant as well, but and it's fluctuated a bit. Like we just had a really great kid who was in college, so he just went back to school, and then we just brought my cousin on, actually, just kind of part-time to fill in for him. But we're actively hiring for a new foreman role for hardscaping, for like more, yeah, hardscaping installation for next year. So it does fluctuate quite a lot, but typically between 4 and 7 kind of people.
Yeah. Yeah, you mentioned like you and Lucy in the office. How does your week usually look in terms of like field time versus office time? And I'll group things like consultation and design into office.
Yeah. Yeah. So I guess first off, I have to give all my love in the world to Lucy. She has helped so much and was critical, really. At the time, I think I was second year in business. Wasn't really hiring. I mean, I couldn't even imagine hiring another permaculture designer, or somebody who's knowledgeable enough and had the sales skills to be able to take over to do consultations. I mean, from a hiring perspective, like the technical stuff, like the field labor, that makes sense, but it was a really daunting thing to think about somebody coming in and being being able to trust somebody to take over consultations and design. But Lucy came out of the blue, and I hired her originally as just kind of my assistant, but turned into very quickly the VP of sales and design. And she's exceptional with all things permaculture design. She has the art. I'm an engineer kind of based designer where I'm like form, function, attributes, like here's the math, here's the spacing, and she's way more like artistic and of the humanities and just okay, but what is the feeling of it? And so we come together to work on designs in that way. Um, but my week now, so Lucy handles all client incoming clients, the whole client journey, really, through initial consultation to design to estimating, quoting, invoicing, and then I take over for project manager perspective, and I look at, and she also manages scheduling, but I'll take over when it comes to like managing, the crew, the order of operations as far as like what jobs, we work together with a lot of these things as well, but the scheduling is like a really difficult part, trying to see, okay, how many people do we need for how many days for this job, ordering material way ahead of time. And so I have a lot of desk work, probably 70% desk work, 30% field work, especially now that we're expanding into more hardscapes. And we don't have many people with hardscape experience. And so I've been taking the lead on that. But it's also been kind of cool because we're learning it together. So I bought, a course, an online course of how to hardscape. And we've all been taking that together. Like the crew and I have been learning together on that, which has been nice because we're all on the same level. It's not like one person knows everything and is just barking orders at everyone else. It's a bit more collaborative in that sense. But yeah.
Is that paid time for people? How are you creating that kind of professional development piece within the team like that?
Yeah, I haven't formalized it quite as well as I would like to yet, but a lot of times it's like not pay time, people on their own. I say, hey, we're doing this tomorrow. Watch this. It could be a 15-minute video of like how to install polysand. So we're not asking much, but there is a bit of a subtle pressure I feel when we show up the next day and three people are like, "Oh yeah, this is step by step exactly what we need to do," and one person's like, "What?" And they didn't do it. And so I think there's some positive peer pressure in that sense. But otherwise, we don't have the time right now. So ideally, it would be over the winter. Like I would encourage and or pay or find some creative way to structure it. Ideally, the people are excited and interested and curious and want to learn and know that they'll be a better employee and know that they'll gain more skills for themselves by doing it. And so that's another kind of cultural thing from a conscious curiosity is one of our other core values where it's like we're hungry, we want to learn as much as we can to do the best that we can.
Yeah, that is such a desirable characteristic to find in the in somebody who wants to be on the team, somebody who wants to really be there and learn and sees their job as a learning opportunity and not just a place to get paid. But
One thing that we have been focusing on is drive time too. And so if there's three people in the truck, one person's driving, I say, hey, the passenger, watch this. It's a 20-minute drive to the job site. And watch this 15-minute video. This is exactly what you're going to do when you get there. Like using drive time strategically, and then teach the person who's driving can hear it, but then when you're on site, teach it to them. And now, okay, the passenger takes the lead and says, okay, this is what we have to do, and teaches everyone else, so that again, we're all on the same page and maximizing the value of that drive time.
yeah. Yeah, so break down your team a little bit more for me because I noticed that you've got a foreman, you've got a maintenance lead, and I'm really curious about how you trained or found those leadership roles because in a small business of your size, it's really challenging in my experience to get to that point where you kind of like hand those things off and feel like, okay, I'm going to be doing this whole 70-30 thing that you just described and not be the face on the job all day. And would love to hear you speak to that a bit.
Yeah, I am so grateful. Again, in our industry, in this space, we attract awesome people. in general. The people who are leaving a more conventional landscaping job or some other physical labor job, like, and who are interested at all in gardening, or God forbid if they know what permaculture is and they see that job posting and like, I can work for a permaculture company, like that's usually, the kinds of people that we're trying to attract. They're a diamond. They're a diamond in the rough. But I'm really grateful that we did find our current foreman. His name is Steven. He's only 20 years old. He was 19 when we hired him, but he's a bit of a savant. I mean, I've been so impressed, and it's really given me a whole new perspective on this generation. Especially in the trades, you hear all the time, these kids these days, they don't know how to work. This kid is a workhorse. He is so much of a self-starter. Like he was running his own landscaping business on his own since he was like 15. His dad was an arborist and he worked with him doing tree work for years. And he just like has this essence of leadership. He was a natural leader, but he came in as a laborer and was was introduced to permaculture in his advanced whatever. He started taking community college when he was still a senior in high school before he even graduated, and his professor introduced him to permaculture and he was hooked. So it was a really cool serendipitous, really unique thing, which I'm really grateful for. But I had an existing foreman who was a bit of a different cultural fit. He was my friend from school, but he was a military police officer. He was in the army, and he just had this like pretty authoritative leadership style. And so it just unfortunately didn't work out, but it was a good full year where he trained, Steven trained underneath him and learned a lot of the work ethic and the skills, just to get him up to status where the next season he became the foreman at 19 years old. And I have been able to and I worked with him for almost 6 months where there was a transition period where I came in as foreman and worked with him, just him and I, for almost half the season. And I was able to work with him directly and try to brain dump all the wisdom I could onto him. And so he took over. And then we just hired a maintenance lead this year, and she's phenomenal as well. And that was, again, I don't think we even had a job posted actively. We weren't actively recruiting, but we definitely needed somebody to take over maintenance because that was a huge bottleneck for us where we had a lot of awesome installation projects, and then all these installation projects want maintenance, but we just didn't have the capacity. We only had the one crew, and to go and to allocate one day to go bang out a bunch of maintenance jobs and then go back to an installation, it was difficult. And so having her has been a great opportunity. And she came with a lot more like farming and vegetable background, but a very strong desire to learn. And so that was another opportunity where it's like, I'll pay for you to go take this training on horticulture, fine gardening, especially as we get into this winter. I'm excited for even more of that. But, she'll come in and say, hey, I watched this YouTube video all about how to prune hydrangeas. So this client that I know is coming up, like, I feel more well equipped. And it's just, again, that's so, so important to us because we don't have the capacity to train all those minute details as much as we would like to. But yeah, so we've just been lucky, honestly, very grateful, lucky. And I think the culture has attracted those kinds of people, which, very grateful for.
Hey friends, we are wrapping up the first portion of our interview here, but you can listen to the full episode inside the Foodscaper membership. Members get access to the complete episode, our full library of training videos, and a community forum where you can get feedback on your work and make professional connections as you build your edible landscaping career. Get that first month free at thefoodscaper.com/membership. And thank you so much for listening. Keep growing.